A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P.
From the ABCs to pomp and circumstance, it all happens so quickly, and we parents are there for our children. Hi, this is Sharon Marshall Lockett, your host on Home Sweet Homework. We've got a great program planned. I want to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to think about your children's problems and habits and maybe even their idiosyncrasies and see if you recognize your children. Do you have children who can't sit still very well? Maybe they get up and wander around the room. Do you have children that just find it really tedious to do handwriting tasks? Do you notice that your children can talk really well, but when it comes to sitting still and reading or writing or coloring in the lines, that your children struggle? Do you notice that as your children read, they use a ruler or a page or a marker or their finger to run across each line? Do you notice that when they're reading or writing, they twist their body and twist their papers around into just all kinds of contortions? Maybe every once in a while you see them twitch or blink or shrug. And maybe you've been called into a parent conference because they have a behavior problem. It could be that the culprit is vision. Now, they can have 20/20 vision, but when they exhibit these behaviors, they've got a behavior that needs your help. That's what today's program is all about. I'm very excited that I can bring a special guest to you today, Dr. Dennis Spiro, who is a behavioral optometrist. When your children have eye diseases, they need to see an ophthalmologist. When they have vision problems, they're not reading at 20/20. They need an optometrist. But when they have some of the fine-tuned eye-hand motor coordination problems, they probably need to see a behavioral optometrist. My own son exhibited those problems. When he was in first grade, the school psychologist was asked to observe him. You know, when someone gives you bad news about your child, it really is helpful if they convince you that they think your child is cute. And I have to say that this school psychologist did a good job of that. She obviously thought Jeff was a cute kid. She obviously liked him. But she had the daunting task of telling me that he wasn't in the realm of average when it came to behavior. First of all, she was supposed to be quietly observing him in the back of the room, and he wouldn't let her quietly observe anyone. He got up and wandered to the back of the room to chat with her. And when she finished with him, she snuck over to the other side of the room, and pretty soon he came over and tugged on her shirt and said, "What are you doing to her?" Well, this is not normal behavior for a first grader, but he was in 7th grade before we discovered that what really was going on with him was an eye-hand coordination problem and that he needed some vision help. You will learn great things from Dr. Spiro today, and at the end of the program, I'll be answering one of your questions, and I'll be sharing the quotable quote. Stay tuned. My guest today is Dr. Dennis Spiro. He is the director of the Whittier Vision Center in Whittier, California, and has been working with adults and children with learning vision problems and traumatic brain injury for 25 years. Welcome, Dr. Dennis Spiro.
Well, good morning, Sharon, and thank you for providing me with an opportunity to share this information with you and your audience.
Now, one of the things I told my audience last week is that sometimes our children can have 20/20 vision and still have a vision problem going on at school. You work especially with children who are struggling in the classroom for one reason or another. Can you tell us what behaviors these children exhibit in the classroom that might lead a parent to say, we need a doctor like Dr. Spiro?
Okay. You're quite correct that many of the children that I see, and many of the children that general optometrists see, are children that have 20/20 eyesight. They can see the board quite clearly, but they have difficulty doing tasks less than arm's length away. So, for example, they might avoid near visual work entirely, or as much as possible. Maybe they'll complain about discomfort, fatigue. They'll exhibit short attention span. Some of these children are observed with poor posture. They'll hold the book close, or they'll squirm around in their seat. There'll be a variety of other signs and symptoms that might suggest that vision is playing a role in child's learning.
In my son's case, he got up and wandered around the room after a few minutes. He couldn't just sit still and pay attention and listen. And actually, a neurosurgeon tried to give him Ritalin. You know, I'm not anti-medication, but I just knew in my gut that it wasn't right. It took us a long time to find your office. I guess one of the things that I want to make sure parents hear is that when things don't make sense to you, when your children aren't performing the way you expect them to, the way you think they should, start documenting symptoms, but until you know in your gut that it's right for you, don't give in to things like medication. Just keep hunting. I was in the education system, and it took me years to find the right doctor.
Well, it's very hard to find the right doctor sometimes. You know, I am what is called a behavioral optometrist, and this includes term developmental optometrist. About 1 out of every 20 optometrists in the United States are behavioral or developmental optometrists. To be a behavioral or developmental optometrist, you have to spend years in postgraduate continuing education learning to understand the nature of visual problems that are interfering with children and adults' learning. Also learn how to prescribe special vision therapy and lens therapy. These problems. They're far and few between, but we can be located.
Just knowing what right specialty to look for is so important. My pediatrician sent me to an ophthalmologist. Every year we'd have Jeff's eyes checked, and every year the ophthalmologist would say, your eyes are fine, and Jeff, 5-year-old, 6-year-old Jeff would say, sometimes I can't see. And he would say, your eyes are fine. Jeff did have 20/20 vision. He wasn't a cross-eyed child, even though his eyes had crossed after a traumatic experience, because he had depth perception. And so I just thought I was taking him to the right specialist. I found out years later that what I needed was a behavioral optometrist.
One way
totally
that
different profession.
parents and teachers can identify someone who is an optometrist who does use behavioral and developmental methods. Before you make an appointment, talk to the ladies at the front desk, or talk to the doctor himself or herself and ask them if they perform a full series of near-point vision tests. You know, a lot of the testing done in the schools and the pediatrician's office, and even in some general practitioners' offices, they only test it at distance, but 80% of the child's learning takes place at the desk, and so we need to do testing at near point, that is, at the desk distance. Also, you would want to ask questions about visual perception tests are also provided. Ask the doctor's staff if vision therapy is utilized in the office to treat problems of vision. You don't get positive answers to these kinds of questions. Near-point testing, vision perception testing, using vision therapy, then ask the doctor if he or she knows someone that you can be referred to.
That's interesting because your predecessor, Dr. Klingsheim, was my behavioral optometrist.
Yes.
And I've sent a lot of people to you who think as highly of you as I did of him. But I remember when he tested Jeff, he brought me in after the test and put me through every test where Jeff was subnormal. The first one was a little, trace this figure with funny little glasses on. And as I traced it, I thought, I've got better things to do with my life than to sit here tracing Gumby. And when I finished, he said, here's yours, and then held up Jeff's and said, here's Jeff's. And in Jeff's, there was about a 3/4-inch gap right down the middle. That's how far off his eyes were from tracking together. We parents understand dyslexia. We wouldn't know if our children were reading dog and trying to reverse the letters and say God with it. But we don't understand all the other disorders. There are, as I understand, way over 100 vision problems. Can you tell us what maybe 4 or 5 of the common ones were?
Well, I like to think of vision problems, and yes, you're quite correct, there's so many, but I like to kind of group them into 4 or 5 categories, and I think I'm going to kind of use the letter F as a guide here.
Okay.
Let's talk about fixation problems or problems in tracking. Often we'll find that children who are struggling in school, particularly in the reading task, they have trouble moving their eyes from letter to letter, word to word, line to line. Or they have trouble moving their eyes from the board to the desk distance and back up to the board. They have trouble staying in the lines or doing paper cutting activities, or they have trouble with letter spacing and formation. Sometimes these are due to tracking problems, having difficulty moving the eyes in a side-to-side direction, in an organized side-to-side direction. Then there are focusing problems, and now we optometrists use the word focusing in a little different. Psychologists who will talk about focus, attention focus. We talk about the mechanism that makes things clear for the child or adult at the working distance, at the near distance, and that means how far away are you looking and can you make things clear there? Very often we'll find that children who are having focusing problems focus as though the material they were reading or the paper and pencil activity they were doing was further away than it actually is. Sometimes they focus closer than it actually is. Then there are fusion problems. Fusion means getting the two eyes to work together as a team.
So that's what Jeff had.
Yes, that's what you were referring to earlier. That's where the signal from the right eye and the signal from the left eye, they're not blended together well, and there's confusion, possibly. The child complains about things moving on the page when they're not really moving. Things might even be blurry, or the child who is experiencing double vision might actually cover up one eye.
I've seen that a lot in the classroom.
Sure, laying their head down on the paper or the book or very close to it and trying to read.
I have a friend who said that the middle of every letter was blurry, so she couldn't distinguish E's and A's and O's.
Yes, those are the kinds of things that can occur. And there are problems with form perception. That opens up a big area. Problems of reversals, getting those B's and D's mixed up.
And that would then be where dyslexia would fall in. So you gave us the 4 F's: fixation, focus, fusion, and form.
Perception.
And
we can talk about fine finger skills or visual control of those fine skills.
And in those 4 categories, there could be 120 or so diagnoses, all kind of cousins or semi-related to what we would understand as dyslexia.
Dyslexia itself is a very broad topic and involves a lot of issues, but there is a misunderstanding amongst certain educational specialists and medical specialists that behavioral optometrists are claiming that they are curing reading problems with vision therapy. That's not what we're doing. What we are doing is we are providing the child, building into the child's visual system the skills that help the child learn to read. So we're not taking over the reading teacher's job. We're helping make it easier for the reading teacher to teach the child how to read.
A good
Providing
point.
the necessary visual skills. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to tracking. Very popular word decoding process is phonics, sounding out. Well, you got to go letter by letter in sounding out, and you have to associate a sound to each of those letters. Well, if a child is having tracking problems and is not able to keep the place, then as the child is sounding out and skipping letters, even if they know all the sounds of the letters, when they go to blend, it's not going to make any sense. And
Absolutely. And in Jeff's case, under stress, it got more severe. So when I went into the teacher, I remember the parent-teacher conference in 4th grade, the teacher sat me down and said, now Jeff didn't pass his reading proficiency, so you need to be reading with him. And then she said, wait a minute. I don't know why Jeff didn't pass his reading proficiency. He reads well. Don't worry about it. Well, years later, when we got in and got involved in vision therapy, we discovered that because of the fact that his eyes weren't tracking together, his eyes would cross, and the more stress he was under, the greater the cross. He would literally blank out whole words. So under stress, he would miss one word in every line, which meant he didn't do well on comprehension. Not because he couldn't comprehend, but because his eyes were malfunctioning in the process.
That's right. And it's very frustrating for a child, so many bright children that find themselves in this situation, and it's really, it makes them very frustrated, and it really cuts down on their motivation for wanting to try.
One of the things I wanted to reiterate with that is that anytime there is a mismatch between verbal behavior and written behavior, start looking for a vision issue. A child who is bright enough to carry on a conversation with you but does poor written work has something else going on with them, and it certainly isn't that they lack intelligence.
And also the child who the story is read to that child, the child has excellent comprehension for the story, but if the child attempts the story for herself, big drop in the child's ability to understand what's going on in the story.
The good news from you is that there is hope, that student lives can be changed with the right kind of help. So when we observe these crazy behaviors, vision is one thing we want to be looking at to find help for our children. And when we finally find the right doctor, the behavioral optometrist, the optometrist that does vision therapy, you run them through a battery of tests so you can identify which of those 4 F's they're dealing with. And then you go through something called vision therapy. Now, I can tell you that Jeff loved it, but give us just a quick example of what vision therapy entails.
Well, first of all, vision therapy is a set of clinical activities that can be done in the office as well as at home that help an individual learn to track better, focus better, coordinate the eyes better. Also, it helps with visual memory, visualization skills. There might be an activity, for example, in tracking where a child is required to track each line with a pencil and then circle each letter in the alphabet in order. This is a timed exercise, and week by week the letters get smaller and the requirement for the time goes up. This is an activity, as simple as it sounds, that helps children with tracking problems learn to use their eyes more effectively in tracking. And it's not really a muscle activity exercise. It's more of a brain training exercise through the visual system, because what the child is learning is how to use peripheral vision, that is, information off to the side as to where to move the eyes next. And that is what the child is learning, and that's what makes tracking better. And later on, it transfers to the reading task and makes reading more fluent.
I do have to say that Jeff loved this activity. I was afraid that he'd balk at it, but in reality, he got mad at me if my schedule prevented us making a meeting and I had to change it. One of the things I remember him doing was working with a little Lazy Susan, and we'd spin the Lazy Susan, and he would match colors and put golf tees in the holes with the right colors while it was spinning. So it wasn't just more color cut and paste. It wasn't a repeat of what he did in the classroom. It was very focused, coaching visual attention, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. And for us, it was life-changing.
And another example of an exercise, we use a lot of lenses in our therapy, especially when there are problems in focusing at the near point. One exercise involves the use of what are called flippers. Those are two sets of lenses on a single handle. And there's a positive set of lenses that tend to make the print look larger, and a negative set of lenses that tend to make the print look smaller. And then the child would read through the lenses read the material first through one set of lenses, and then read the material through the other set of lenses. And what the child is learning is to focus and refocus without a time lag, and also learn how close and far this reading material is through those lenses. So these are the kinds of activities that we would do in vision therapy. And you don't find these activities being prescribed by medical eye doctors. You don't find them prescribed by educational specialists within the school, because they are the activities associated with vision therapy prescribed by the behavioral or developmental optometrist.
When I went with vision therapy, my pediatrician thought I had wasted my money. And then I have a friend who's an ophthalmologist, and she had a daughter about the same age as Jeff's, and we met one time, and she said, "How's Jeff?" And I laughed and said, "Well, you won't approve, but I have him in visual therapy." And she laughed and said, "Don't judge me, tell me about it." When I described for her what was being done in your office, she said, "I sometimes send children in for vision therapy myself, and I do have to tell you that you found a great one. He gave you specific outcomes. You knew precisely what was going on, and he didn't keep you in therapy forever. He empowered you to do the work."
Right. It's very important not to prejudge. The ophthalmologist is trained as a surgeon to deal with the meat of the eye. That's a highly complicated specialty. There's a lot of training that goes into that. The behavioral optometrist is the specialist in vision, the one who actually is assessing not only can we see something, yes or no, is the eye healthy, yes or no, but what do we do with the information after we see it? How do we understand it? How do we make sense out of it? How can our bodies appropriately respond to this information? For example, we'll deal with children who seem to have problems with ball sports, bouncing a ball, catching a ball, throwing a ball. So we will actually do vision therapy with children who have difficulties in these large motor muscle areas, as they're called, but they involve a very strong visual component. The old phrase, "keep your eye on the ball," that the coaches used to say, well, that's very true. That's a very important part of coordinated and organized sports activity as well.
This is fascinating. You have just a lot of data. How many children have problems with vision where they could benefit?
Generally speaking, in any average classroom setting, about 20 to 25% of the children there will actually have significant undetected vision problems.
And now, if they come to you and vision is not at the core of what's going on, what do you do?
Well,
where do you send them?
That's an excellent question. I also will screen for auditory processing difficulties. I also hold a PhD in psychology, specializing in children's learning and memory development. I can not make a diagnosis, but say, you need to see this other type of specialist. I'm not going to tell that parent if this child has some form of autism or may have some sort of pervasive developmental delay. That's not my job. My job is to make sure that that parent has an appropriate referral. So I'm aware of these other issues that may be involved, and maybe the child does not have vision problems but has some other issue going on.
And it could be any number of things. I was amazed at how big the vision issue was. And your estimate of 25% is probably right on target with what I would guess as I work with teachers in the classroom, that about 1 in 4 have something that by the time they get to middle and high school, where I usually see them, it exhibits itself as a behavior problem, as an attitude problem, as what we might call emotionally committed to failure, when in reality, something is going on physically with them, and they reach a point where they think, I'd rather be belligerent than stupid, and so they begin the behavior.
Yes, it's unfortunate when a vision problem creates a learning disability, which then creates an emotional difficulty which takes on a life of its own.
That is so true. Okay, couple of just last minute thoughts. Where do parents go? If they live near Whittier, they can come see you. If not, where do they go to find help in their area?
Well, there's a couple of good sources. One is the College of Optometrists and Vision Development, and let me give you their website. It's www.covd.org. They can locate a doctor through that website. They can also find a doctor through the Optometric Extension Program, and that's www.oep.org.
C is in cat, O, V is in Victor, D is in David.org.
Yeah, that's OEP, P is in Paul.
.org.
.org.
Sound great. And there are referrals
Actually,
there.
email me if they would like. EJ Spiro, S-P-I-R-O, @att.net. I do have a website. They want to check out the website first because it has links to answer a lot of questions that we've been talking about in more detail. It's www.optometrist.org/Dr. Spiro.
And now, when should they seek a vision specialist like you? What behaviors do they look for? Just kind of a quick recap.
Just in general, developmental optometrists actually will start seeing infants at age 6 months.
And how would I know that my infant needed you?
You need someone. It's when the child is struggling in school, not keeping up with or struggling to get to the middle of the average of the classroom. When the teacher is concerned about the child's progress in school, this could start as early as first grade or even kindergarten. In kindergarten, if the child is struggling to remember letters or basic words, having difficulty remembering color names and geometrical shapes, a tremendous amount of time, paper and pencil, and basic cutting and craft work skills could occur again in first grade, even in kindergarten. These problems, children tend not to grow out of these problems. They tend to grow into them, and they just get compounded year after year.
That is so true. And by the time I see them in middle and high school, most of the time they're behavior problems and could have been fixed so easily years and years ago. Thank you so very much for being my guest. And any last minute quick advice for a parent?
Well,
kind of a one-liner for them.
A one-liner?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Give them as much love as possible, and that's all I have to say.
That is so powerful. Thank you so very much. The question of the week is a big one. How can I tell if my child really has a learning problem or if they've just learned how to manipulate me or how to press my buttons in order to get what they want? Now, the really sad thing about that question is the answer is you don't know, you won't know, but a couple of thoughts for you. Let me go back to work the circle. We've looked at physical problems today, and specifically the physical problem of vision. If that doesn't work, look at emotional, look at spiritual, look at intellectual, and then go back and work the circle again. But the bottom line is that every child wants to succeed. There's no such thing as a child who would just love to be a failure in life. So if you're struggling with your children, if your child is struggling, never ever think they just don't care. As Dr. Spiro said, love them a lot. Our quote of the day is from Deborah Phelps, a middle school principal and the mother of Olympian superstar Michael Phelps. She said, "Too many adults looked at my boy and saw what he couldn't do. At the Olympics, the world tuned in to see what he can do." I want to urge you to look at what's right with your children, not at what's wrong with them. Give your children roots, teach them to fly, and give them wings. This is Sharon Marshall Lockett, HomesweetHomework.com. Thank you for joining us.